Hey, welcome back to another episode of Street Level with Chris Chermak. Last week we had my good friend Matt Gaddis on from Camp Freedom up here in Carbondale, and we talked about all the great things that they do for first responders and veterans. It's a great place. I hope you enjoyed that show. Today we have my other good friend Chuck Volpe, and we're going to talk about the pandemic, the election coming up, and lots of other things. So it's going to be a great conversation. So here's Chuck. All right, Chuck, I really appreciate you coming on today.
Here,
this
Chris.
is awesome. You know, finally, the roles are a little reversed, but it's all you today.
Well, I'm happy. I think I've said to maybe even you, but many of my guests, look, I've 8 years of television. I've done 225 or 30 shows over that time. And I tell everybody, a lot of people I'm friends with, that I much prefer being on the other side of the camera, the other side of the table. I'd rather get asked the questions than be the host. And
Well, good, because I got some questions.
Good.
No, so we started out. Let's start at the beginning. Let's just go. We're only going back to 2020.
Okay.
I became a commissioner.
Yes, you did.
And
a good thing for this county.
well, thank you. And then kind of all hell broke loose.
No kidding.
I kind of had inherited a financial disaster with the county. That was the first hurdle I had to jump over.
Yes.
Still getting criticized for that. But people have to realize, we had to right the ship. I have no other way to explain this, but we had to right the ship.
Right.
And, as a conservative Republican, I had a very difficult decision to make. But for years, the administrations have been warned, you got to look at this, you got to pay attention. You're not funding the pension fund. Over 13 years, they didn't fully ever fund the pension fund. Right. And then they bought the Globe store at the end.
A money pit.
Oh, my God. So, as budgeted for $17 million, I know we're over $25 million. I don't even know where it's going to end. I mean, it's a constant battle with that old building. We're making the best of it, but so that's what led to having to do what we had to do with the tax increase. And I have to defend myself because I'm a business person. We don't print money at Lackawanna County level. We have the taxes is what pays the bills. And to help fund the courthouse system, the prison system, the area on aging, and every other department that we have is all funded. Well, some of them are grants, but it comes from taxes. And to pay for these mistakes that were made over the years, we had to address it.
Right.
And then the problem the problem that was going to be is, if we don't do it now, all right, what's going to happen next year? If we say we need to look at this next year, well, instead of a 6 mil increase, it'll be a 12.
Right.
What if we don't address it then? Well, it might be a 24. Like it just kept growing. So we had to stop the bleed. We had to do what we had to do. And then I said at the same meeting, I will make sure that we have a in-depth review of this budget, see where we can save money, make money, and get on track. And which we've done. We have a bipartisan budget study committee, and they're working hard. They started in January, and they've been diving into the budget. So maybe someday down the road we can lower them, hopefully. But
sure.
So that's where that went.
It was a courageous stance, I think you took, Chris. Somehow, one of the problems with our society, effectively in this country anymore, is we live in a world of like name tags and basically profiling, for lack of a better word. You have a letter in front of your name, and that basically puts you into a stereotype. Republican stereotype is fiscally conservative, and God forbid there'll never be a tax increase. Republicans will not vote for a tax increase. And to me, that's is usually the case with profiling and stereotyping individuals 100% wrong. You made a courageous decision. And it shouldn't have had to be. It shouldn't have had to be, well, because I'm a Republican, I can't vote for a tax increase even though we need it, even though it was basically Democrats that put us in this position. You inherited a difficult financial situation, and you made a judgment that political leaders have to make. And too many of our political leaders today need to take an opinion poll to find out how it tests, because God forbid someone might take exception to it. So as I told you at the time, I applauded your courage, and I thought it was the right thing to do, and you did what you should have done.
Well, and I felt that, and that was the hardest decision I had to make early on. I wanted to crawl under the table that day and then have to vote for that. But you know what? We couldn't kick the can down the road any farther. It's not fair. It's not fair to anyone. And, but when it came right down to it, the average increase to the average homeowner was $100 a year. So it wasn't, well, it's a tax increase. What are you going to say? But, I raised my own taxes. I raised my family's taxes. Unfortunately, it had to be. But we move on. And then we get the pandemic thrown at us.
Yeah.
And then you're a businessman, and here we are. Got to shut everything down. And that was insane. How much of it was political? How much of it was pandemic? Nobody knew really what was going on. That was nerve-wracking. But we shut down businesses. We shut down pretty much the whole world because we need to flatten a curve.
Right. Well, my view. Well, I've talked a lot about it, so I guess I'm going to repeat myself for some people. On my television show on Fox, we hit the pandemic, as you're aware, very, very hard. And to me, it was patently unfair, number one. A point of view which, often it's an opinion. It's like a bar argument over who's the greatest home run hitter. There's no real, it's a point of view. I think we have a determination of whose argument was right, and the argument that it was done wrongly, incompetently by the governor, Tom Wolf, and unfairly is supported by the fact that a United States federal judge, Judge Stickman, in fact, in September ruled that Governor Wolf's shutdown, to your point, Chris, was, in fact, a violation of the 14th Amendment, both the dual clauses, equal protection, and as well as due process. Both things were violated. And then, of course, the First Amendment right of assembly was violated. And the patent unfairness, Chris, which you and I have talked about, is that, how are the big box stores open? You go drive by a Lowe's or a Home Depot or a Target's, you can't get a parking spot. There's several hundred people there. And yet the small businesses, the ones that could have probably more effectively been open safely,
correct,
were shut down. And what's worse is not only were they shut down, effectively from a competitive standpoint, a lot of their wares and the types of sales that those businesses were engaged in were exactly provided by the big box stores, which means they took over their clients, they took over their customers. And I'll end this point with one final point. We have a large manufacturer, I believe it's in the central part of Pennsylvania, central to southeast Pennsylvania. And it employs many workers, hundreds of workers, American workers, American-owned, American factory. And one of the things they produce were made in America, American flags.
All right.
They were shut down. So for the 4th of July, you had folks going for their 4th of July picnics to get American flags. They're going to Targets and Home Depot and Lowe's and places like that. Those American flags were made in China.
Yep.
So you're destroying an American business with American workers, and yet, again, the patent unfairness. And why couldn't you go to a house of worship, for example? They're on top of each other in Home Depot. You can't go to church or synagogue and all that. And, of course, that was determined to be a violation of the United States Constitution as well. So we don't have to sit here, Chris, and have an opinion that what Governor Wolf did was a catastrophe. A federal judge said it was. And, by the way, his fellow Democratic Auditor General, Eugene D. Pasquale, in one of the most scathing intra-party audits ever done, a forensic audit, criticized the governor from stem to stern about unfairness, changing standards. It was a disgrace.
Yeah. And so he does all that, but then what does he do to the nursing homes? That's, the people that we should have been protecting weren't being protected. And until Senator Dechek stepped in and helped us. I mean, when he called me, I jumped right. I said, we're in with this. And that was to get supplies directly to the nursing homes and get them all the PPE they needed, whatever they needed. They order them. Instead of sending them just boxes of gowns that they don't need or boxes of this or that, they could request the stuff that they needed. So, he worked hard. We worked hard on that. But the governor, he failed at the level with, what did we lose? 13,000 people, I think, or pretty much in nursing homes.
Well, I'll give you the percentage. I can give you an exact. I did a show on this. And this is well into June, when people are now really hurting, losing their businesses, losing jobs by the tens of thousands lost businesses, millions of jobs. And at that point in northeastern Pennsylvania, and they did this study in about 7-8 counties in the northeast corridor, we'll call it, Chris. And here's a staggering number. 83% of the COVID deaths, and this is as of the middle of June of 2020, 83% were from nursing homes. Or senior centers, the like, similar to nursing homes. They were forced to take COVID-positive patients. Before the governor or the Secretary of Health, Dr. Rachel Levine, provided any PPE, before they were properly cleaned and sanitized and made ready, there were no restrictions or protocols for which guests could come. Often guests could have brought the COVID right into it. And what do you think you're going to get when you make them by an order, judicial or executive decree, make them take COVID-positive patients? They were petri dishes, for Christ's sake. It just a tragedy that didn't have to occur.
No, you're right. And we watched it unfold from the West Coast. Before it even got here, we were watching, and that's where the problems were, in the nursing homes. We should have known right from the start. Right. That's who we needed to protect, and they failed. It's awful. But then we get back to the small businesses. You talked about Walmart and all the big stores are open, the big box stores. Now, you can't go maybe get a haircut because they're closed. My father couldn't sell a car. Now, we don't have 100 people in there looking at cars at a time. We might have one. Right. Can't open a door. Couldn't work on a car at first. We couldn't even service vehicles. Now, what if you needed to get to work and your car was broke down? That was a problem. But you could go to Walmart and buy some lawn furniture if you needed it. So, that was insane. But I think that all goes to, let's face it, the governor, he could really hurt the small business owner, but he couldn't touch those big guys.
Right.
They have more money than he has.
Right.
So, that was unfortunate. But you go to the salons, the restaurants, the bars, they have to be trained and serve safe to keep things clean and operate safely. The small little mom and pops, like you just said, they were more capable of operating safely because they could limit people coming in, and pretty much they're all, there are one or two people in there at a time. So I really disagreed with all those decisions. I used to spend my days walking. I never missed a day at work, and I know you didn't miss a day at work. I go in at 7:30 in the morning to the county building. Nobody there. We're still operating, we're still functioning. But I would walk around town and I'd knock on the businesses, knock on the door. They're in there, they're struggling. They're trying to do some web business and stuff. They weren't prepared for that. So it was very difficult. I think it was, when you talk about essential workers, everybody's an essential worker. So I totally disagreed with that. And while the governor was trying to shut them down and beat them up, I'm out there trying to get grant money for them and help them and get them, keep them, at least try to survive.
Well, one of the things, Chris, you raise a great point, and this is a fundamental failure, and it starts with the governor. The first thing, I think, from my own executive experience, plus a pretty avid student of political history, the first thing you should do if you're a governor, and I ran for the office, so I'm somewhat familiar with the powers and responsibilities of it, is it's called collaboration. And by collaboration, I mean leadership in the House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats, should have been called into the governor's offices. And at that same meeting, we're lucky in this state, this great state of Pennsylvania. We have some of the finest universities, nationally and internationally recognized, one of the best health centers out at UPMC, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Centers. which are now as big or bigger, believe it or not, than Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Highmark, and all that. They're gigantic. Some of the greatest teaching hospitals are in the city of Pittsburgh, as well as Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania, from a health component. Then you talk about the economic component. We have, again, some of the finest schools. University of Pennsylvania, Ivy League. It's called the Wharton School of Business. Some of the finest graduates in this country graduated from there. Well, how are they not sitting at that table to develop a policy for the economic impact that you're discussing, as well as the health response? But guess what he did? He had a policy team in his office made up of political ideologues. He would not release to the press their names. There were no minutes for those meetings. And we find out from his Deputy Chief of Staff Robinson in sworn testimony before a federal judge, talked about that there were no minutes, talked about that they couldn't reveal who was at those meetings. And finally, guess who was not at the meeting? The governor himself did not attend any of those meetings. So he destroyed people's lives by remote control. Offensive, it's impeachable, and, well, whatever. I'm pretty outspoken on it, as you can tell.
Well, hey, a lot of lives are at stake here. There are businesses that are never coming back again. Where are we going from here? Finally, they're talking about the end of the month, we can get back to somewhat normal, open up. But it's too late for all those folks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, right? Thanks.
You know what's worse about this whole thing, Chris, is that we actually have a look at almost like a test or study group to kind of do a comparison in. You look at states like Florida, states like Texas. They had Republican governors. They effectively stayed open. There were some, obviously, CDC guidelines and some restrictions and some masking and appropriately. But effectively, their economy stayed open. And if you look at it, their deaths and cases of COVID-19 are actually better than the average. Now, some critics will say, well, that's not great. They're not near the top. Well, wait a minute. They're better than the average having been fully open. States that are behind them, like Pennsylvania, were shut down and destroyed people's lives. The point of the matter is it was done wrongly. It was done, and I had more than a few guests on my television show talk about this was ideologically based, and I firmly believe that. This was looked at through the prism of a point of view, a liberal point of view, and we're seeing that basically does not respect enough individual freedom of expression and individuality and individual rights. They want to herd us into this community-type groups instead of allowing for individualism. The states that allowed it have not had the catastrophe to their economy or all of the ancillary effects, the loss of life from suicide, depression, child abuse, domestic violence, all these things, the alcoholism, the drugs went crazy because you put people into depression and they turned to and made wrong choices. All of that corollary collateral damage was never even contemplated, which again gets back to who was on that committee giving advice. Apparently no one any good.
No. I'm witnessing it now, even with my own kids. And I have two kids, one son in college, finishing up, and my daughter in a junior in high school. She lost a whole year. And you know what? She's been locked in her room for months. It's not good. It's not good. And
want to hear a statistic that I actually had? Yeah. I did a show on this subject. A reliable poll, reliable study. It was issued by, not the CDC, but it actually appeared in medical journals. It was a reliable study. That during the pandemic, with the school shutdowns, they tested teenage age, so I'm going to say high school age kids. 1 in 4 during the pandemic and the shutdown had contemplated suicide. 1 in 4, Chris.
Yep.
Staggering.
Oh, it is now, and thankfully, one of the good things I got to do as a commissioner, I helped create the Lackawanna County Suicide Prevention Alliance. We had nothing. We had nothing, and for years, there were some groups, Northeast Suicide Prevention Alliance or Initiative. They've repeatedly asked the commissioners, we want to form something, a task force or something with the county. We're the only county that didn't have one. Never did it. She asked me one time. This is Kathy Wallace. I said, done. Let's get it done. A month later, we had our first meeting, and we had the district attorney's office. We had behavioral health. We had everybody involved, state police, local police, veterans. We have sometimes 50 people on a Zoom call. So and what a time to do it. What a time to do it. So, but
What you did there, to your credit, it's called collaboration.
exactly.
You bring people together, something our governor did not do, which is to his everlasting shame.
Well, you know what? Sometimes you have to realize you're not always the smartest person in the room, and I know I'm always not the smartest person in the room.
Well, he thinks he is.
Well, apparently. Well, moving forward, I think, let's hope with vaccinations and everybody getting hopefully back to normal, things will start to improve. But it's going to be a long time. The financial destruction that's been done already, some people will never overcome that. So you can't get people to come back to work. They're making more money collecting unemployment.
And the Democrats are pushing out trillions more of dollars to encourage them, apparently, not to go back to work.
Well, I don't know where they're getting the money.
Well, they're not. What they're doing is one of the great hypocrisies to me of the far left wing of the Democratic Party and the liberal Democrats is this. They are rightly, and I want to be clear, I'm not against the facts that climate change is real, and we need to be responsible in how we deal with it. Completely eliminating all fossil fuels in 5 or 10 years is ridiculous. Not only is it irresponsible and ridiculous, what it will cost, and again, human cost, in lost jobs, and all the, again, collateral damage that comes from that is just wrong. Mm-hmm. Not to mention there are many ways, like natural gas is clean energy. I mean, it's fossil fuel, it's Marcellus shale, but it's clean energy. And there are ways to obviously also minimize the oil. But having said that, and I understand we need to be responsible in our carbon footprint, but having said that, the hypocrisy I mentioned. They're so concerned about future generations and having a planet that's livable and not subject to climate catastrophes. What they care nothing about is who's going to pay these trillions and trillions of dollars that they're spending now. You know who's going to pay for that? Your grandchildren, my grandchildren, and their grandchildren.
Yeah.
We're talking about 50, 70 years down the road. What about their quality of life when they're going to be taxed in ridiculous amounts to pay for this? Well, here's the alternative. We'll become a debtor nation to China. China's our biggest creditor right now in the United States.
Yep.
And imagine when we're done with 9 or 10 trillion in 18 months of COVID-related relief. It's a looming catastrophe. But again, the hypocrisy. Apparently, they don't care about the quality of life of our future generations, except for the climate. That we're going to be good at.
Yeah. Well, the other issue we had last year was the election. Now, a lot of disappointed folks weren't happy with the outcome.
Right.
And now that I've been out on the campaign trail myself, knocking on doors, talking to people, some of them saying, I don't think I'm ever going to vote again. My vote doesn't count. How do you convince that person that, it does? Yeah, it does. How do we fix the problem? Well, you got to vote the right people in. Well, my vote doesn't count. How does it? Well, that's a difficult conversation. But I'm encouraging people get out and vote.
Right.
Whether there was or there wasn't illegal things that went on with our election, I probably will never know. But
right.
It's a tough situation we're in.
I don't think that I still am a lawyer. I was a trial lawyer, and we had an old saying: "It's not what you know; it's what you can prove." And the fact of the matter, based on what was provable, I don't fall into conspiracy theory that the election was actually stolen in terms of actually whether through a computer system changing votes or vote harvesting, which we all can say probably went on, but again, you can't prove it.
Right.
But the point of the matter is, we had a thing I learned and understood going back to trial tactics. If you can frame for the jury the issue, you win. Mostly you win the case. If the other side frames the issue, you lose the case. Well, what happened here is, to use that as an analogy, the Democrats not legally stole the election, but to your point and why people are upset, they framed the framework of the election, the issue, if you will. They put it in terms of COVID-19. They used the pandemic. I remember I said ideologically based. And they used that as the hammer to basically eviscerate any responsible voter identification or connecting people with ballots. Mm-hmm. so that, drop boxes on every corner. What our governor and Kathy Boockvar, who was at that point the Secretary of State of the Commonwealth, they changed the election laws, and I'm going to take to my grave, illegally and unconstitutionally. Only the legislature is vested with the ability to change the election laws. They did it unilaterally. So basically, they created the impression, if you will, or the context for why people would doubt the outcome. They did it. And now, of course, they finger point, say, how dare you, you're a conspiracy nut.
Yeah.
Well, they created enough of, I'll say, telltale breadcrumbs that there could be corruption, so they kind of have to live with it now, which segues nicely on something I've done a view on recently. I have an opinion on Fox News on Tuesday night about this voter ID. A lot of screaming about that it's racist. I did a view, and my point of view is I think the racist issue is the Democrats, especially liberal Democrats. Because if you look at literally what they're saying, by having voter identification, you're trying to suppress black votes or votes from people of color. What a bunch of garbage. What they're actually suggesting is, that's offensive to me, is that these people lack whether it's the intellectual ability or the capabilities or the sophistication to complete a simple voter identification, name, address, a social security number, date of birth, the same types of IDs you need, Chris, to open a checking account, to check into a hotel room, to get on an airplane, and the list goes on and on, to buy alcohol. Well, we have to do that in society anyway. Yeah. And the fact that suggestion that people of color are not capable of completing a simple is the most pejorative, disgustingly racist profiling, arguably, I've ever seen. Oh. It's offensive. If I'm a black person, I'm sitting here screaming about it. How dare you suggest I can't complete a simple voter ID? It's garbage.
You're right. And that's all it is. I mean, you go to the baseball game, in the will call window, you have to show your ID. I mean, come on. I mean, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And, well, I don't know. Let's just hope that we start getting back on track here. The world's going nuts. We're going nuts. Well, so we have an upcoming election now. There's some referendums on there.
Yes.
Have you studied up on any of those at
all?
I
have. Well, there are a bunch.
Yeah.
Well,
what's your opinion on the one where we limit the governor?
Well, there's two, actually.
The two.
There's two.
Two for the governor.
And, well, first of all, for those listening, I'm going to strongly suggest vote yes before I get into the language, which is very misleading and wrong. But you have to see through that and vote yes. And here's effectively what the questions presented are, Chris, specifically. And both are a little different, but effectively the same thing. That is that after 21 days, the governor, who has properly been granted emergency powers to deal with catastrophes where you don't have a time for group sessions, someone has to get out in front of it, and that's the chief executive, that's the governor, properly is granted emergency powers. That's not the issue here. The issue is how long those powers extend unilaterally. And in this case, we learned from the pandemic, they extended into authoritarianism and dictatorship. They went on and on and on and on and on. And the point is of these constitutional questions, what they're saying is, should the governor be limited to a set time period where he can have unilateral authority, can do whatever he wants in his or her judgment? But after a certain time, there has to be collaboration, and he needs to get continued approval from the General Assembly of the state or the Commonwealth in which the problem exists. So, which is only fair.
Of course.
So the law would require collaboration. But what happened here, to the contrary, in Pennsylvania, he had 90-day power. But here's the thing. After 90 days, it was actually after 95 days, the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and Senate voted concurrent resolutions, by the way, members of both parties, to basically end his emergency powers. The law in Pennsylvania, the statute that allows for that concurrent resolution, is clear, crisp, and unequivocal. And what it says is that after 90 days, the legislature has authority to end the governor's emergency powers. Well, intended by the legislature clearly was that would end it. Well, it goes to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, a very liberal, 5-2 Democratic Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. And they interpreted something that isn't even there and said, well, implicit in that is that it has to go to the governor for approval. It's a contradiction in terms. Why would it have to go to the governor for approval if the intent is to take the governor's power to continue emergency powers away? So what this constitutional amendment specifically does is says after 21 days, the governor can only continue emergency powers with the collaboration and permission of the General Assembly. And I'd like to make, and I'll finish on one point, and that's this. There's an outrage, again, from liberal, far-left people, and mostly Democrats, that, well, that's wrong, and we need a captain of the ship in times of crisis. What would be more of a crisis, Chris, than our country going to war? Nothing. Nothing would be more of a crisis. No. And yet, the President of the United States must get permission from Congress for a declaration of war.
Right.
So, like, this isn't an undue interference on the governor's prerogatives, so it's a blatant double standard. So I'll end with this. Vote yes on both constitutional amendments. Vote yes, which in effect will make the governor have to collaborate, which our governor chose not to do.
Right. Well, that's common sense. That's all this is. And, unfortunately, common sense isn't that common anymore.
No kidding.
No
kidding, Chris.
Well, I don't know.
Well, kind of in my general thoughts, I think this. I think that what we're experiencing now as a country is really not new. The sub-issues, the foundation for what's happening now is new. And it's built around, we had a president who, if he could have stayed off his Twitter account, meaning Donald Trump, would still be president. He couldn't. He somehow mistook the Oval Office for a reality television show, and it's not. Oh. Now, for all of those out there that are saying that I'm somehow against Trump, let me be clear. I think he did great things for this country. I think our country was so much better off in fundamental areas. Our tax structure was. We had the best economy in almost 100 years, 75 years, the best economy, lowest unemployment, best economic growth. Our border crisis, there was none. Yeah. He had immigration responsibly under control. He put America first in trade. He did a lot of wonderful things. So let me be clear about that. But if he could have shut his mouth a few more times, if he didn't keep interrupting President Biden during the first debate, for example, here's a man, if you've seen his performances, they're not real good in terms of his ability to deal with issues without cheat sheet cards. Well, guess what? If we actually heard his answers, there would have been something for voters to consider and maybe vote Republican. So he was his own worst enemy.
He was. I agree.
But my point is that the fact of the matter, while all that was going on, Chris, the Republicans net gained, I think, 8 or 9 General Assemblies throughout the country. 8 states that had Democratic majorities went Republican. Yeah. We had a pickup of 13 Republican seats in the United States Congress, which was shocking. We had a pickup of seats in Pennsylvania's General Assembly, in Congress, and for the first time in a generation, we ended up with a Republican Auditor General and a Republican State Treasurer. So clearly, if anything, there was more of a Republican red wave than a blue wave, except for president, which, of course, the Democrats won with Biden. So I believe, looking forward, I think you're going to see a strong pushback next year. I really believe there'll be a red wave around this country. I believe that, for example, back to where I started about, we have culture wars going on, but they're not new. They occurred in the 60s and into the 70s. Yeah. The Vietnam War was a catalyst then. Racial inequality was a catalyst then. Sound familiar? And some of the other issues. But what happened, the far left, even then, going back 50 years, went so far left to socialism areas, the pushback was the silent majority, President Richard Nixon referred to, came out and voted Republican and elected him, and a few years after that, overwhelmingly elected Ronald Reagan. The Reagan Revolution was the pushback from a large swath of this country, Chris, that aren't far right or far left. They're in the middle. Whether you're an R or D, they're moderate, they're in the middle. And they were not prepared to go to the far left socialist, which was going on then. In fact, they moved hard right to balance it out. I see that trend continuing next year.
I agree. Well, if it doesn't, we're going to be in a civil war. We're going to be the Reds against the blue states. Exactly. I mean, that's where we're heading. You can't. Everybody can't live in Florida and Texas.
Right.
But we have a very important election coming up here locally. I mean, I'm in it.
I know.
And I have to go back and look at my job as a commissioner. I take my job very serious, and I do my job, and I go to work every day, and I do it for the right reasons, I feel. And I love my job, and I'll tell you what, I love the people I work with. Some of the county people that I deal with are some of the best people you could deal with.
Right.
Some of these departments, I mean, these people don't make a lot of money when you think about it, and they're very dedicated. They work 24/7. So the county has awesome people, and let me tell you, when I first got in there, I didn't know what to expect because you think it's a county job, it's like a state job. They don't do anything. Not the case. Not the case. These departments are shorthanded, understaffed, and overwhelmed with work,
Right.
some of them. But I'm looking at this, John Blake decides he's going to resign. And as a minority commissioner, I can see his frustration now because that's basically what I think it comes down to. He's a senator in a minority Senate.
Right.
Can't get things done that he'd like to do. We'll say, I don't know what goes through his head, but I would think he'd like to do some things here that he can't do.
He said that.
Yeah,
He said
exactly.
that.
Exactly. And I feel the same way. I get along with the other two commissioners. We're there. We do the job. But there's things that I'd like to do, and I can't do it. My hands are tied. That's it.
Two beats one.
That's it. I'm out. And it's frustrating. If I didn't care, if I didn't take my job serious, who cares? I'd have the greatest job in the world. But that's not how I operate. So when this happened, I was approached to, you ought to consider running for Senate. I said, well, I don't know. That's a pretty big step for me. But then I started getting calls from Harrisburg. We want you. We think you'd be a great candidate. We think you'd do the right things, and we want to help you. So I had to make a pretty hard decision.
Sure.
And I chose to take on the task, This would give me an opportunity to still serve the same people that I'm working for now.
A lot more.
And more.
Because you're into 3 counties.
In 3 counties, but again, Lackawanna County as
is
a
the
whole,
biggest part.
that's my group of people now.
Okay.
With a majority Senate at my beck and call or at my behind me, I know I can do some good things here, and that's my whole goal. I don't need this for my resume. I don't need this for my ego. I want to do the right thing.
Right.
I'm hoping that if this is what God has in store for me, that I can do this, and I can, it comes down to money. We're going to bring the money to this region, fix the roads, fix the infrastructure, help get jobs here, help the school districts. I mean, it's everything. It's everything. So that's what I'm looking forward to, and that's what my hope is. And I think I can do a good job at it, and I'm excited to be a part of it. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, you're running a good campaign. Obviously, I'm aware of it, and your commercials are effective on television, and your messaging is dead on. And obviously, your opponent Marty Flynn, the issue he has to deal with, and you're pointing out in your messaging, is you're tying him to Governor Tom Wolf.
Yeah.
And not just singling him out, because I'm not.
Right.
There were most Democrats, including every Democratic representative in this region, and there were 3 or 4 more beside him, at critical times when they should have stood up to the governor and said no and overrode his veto, which would have mitigated the damages. They just gave the governor the proxy and said, yeah, we're with you, and wrongly. And that's a time they should have stood up. So, you're running an effective campaign. Of course, his pitch, Marty Flynn's pitch, is different. He's talking about all he can do with the support of the governor, and has had that support. And of course, is talking about his background and his reason. His advantage to a degree is there is a pretty hefty, in this county, which is a big chunk of the district, Democratic registration lead. So that's why it was a hard decision to get a good Republican. They have one. You're making the right message, and you're taking it to the people. And from what I hear, the race is too close to call, even as of now, which means that if you work hard, you're going to have. They stood by you, as they said. The Republican Senate Campaign Committee brought a lot of money and resources and organizational help. So, I've often said, if you can get your message out, people have a way of figuring out and doing the right thing.
Right.
And you've clearly achieved that goal. So we'll see where the chips fall.
Well, I was dealt with some pretty desperate businesses throughout this pandemic. There were times when obviously they wanted the county to make the decision, go against the governor, let us open,
like
let us do
13 other counties did.
Yeah, right, exactly. And, unfortunately, they were dangling that check in front of our face saying, yeah, go ahead, open up, do whatever you want, and see how much help you get from the state, And, so we couldn't jeopardize the county.
Right.
But in the meantime, I did everything I could to get action plans. I said, give me your action plans. How do you think you can function, operate safely, and follow the guidelines and function instead of just being closed? So I compiled all that information. Probably about 50 businesses got me that. We sent it off to the governor to, and say, look, here's how we can do this. Let the commissioners decide. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Let Luzerne County, let Lackawanna County, let all the counties make their own decisions on how they can operate.
I'm guessing that letter went right in the garbage.
Well, I don't know, unless the mail didn't get it to him yet. I haven't heard yet. I'm still waiting. But
pretty sure it got there. I'm also pretty sure it went right in the garbage.
It got there. But in the meantime, we worked with our economic development department. We got, even 3 days before Christmas, we were handing out $110,000 checks to restaurants and bars.
Right.
Just get through the end of the year.
Right.
Maybe after the first, we can start getting back on track. So, while they were getting slammed by actually my opponent, I'll beat your rear end up and down Main Street.
Yeah, that was not a good moment for him.
that was horrible. He's trying to shut them down. I'm trying to help them out. So that was a bad situation. But I stood with them, and I worked hard to.
And that's why you're
help
running,
them.
Chris.
Well,
right?
and exactly. So we'll see. Yeah. Like I said, it's in God's hands, right?
Exactly right.
And but I appreciate your input on all these issues, and you're a good friend, and you've been a great help for me. I always say you're my political guru, so I appreciate that.
I'm honored, and as I've told you, what I've learned about politics, I've been, unlike you, because you're kind of new to politics, I started when I was 12. I went door to door with my father. He was running for the House of Representatives. And what was then the old 112th, which that district encompassed the entire city of Scranton. The entire city. It was like a mayor's race. That was the old 112. And I remember going to door. My father, a longtime Democrat, switched to Republican because there was no place for him in the party. And some of the issues, even then, again, I'm going back to a time when there was the same culture wars as we're having now.
Yeah.
And he switched and shocked, really, the entire region. He won. He upset a multi-term Democratic popular incumbent and in a close election. So I kind of got the bug then, and I spent the rest of my life involved. As I said, I've run for governor, and I told you, with the battle scars, they come over basically almost 50 years since I was 12 years old when I went door to door with him. So that means almost 50 years I've got in the can, and with the elections I've run, the money I've spent, the people I've been exposed to, I say, look, I have a PhD in it. If I retire as a lawyer and owning an insurance company, a governmental insurance company, and I get tired of all that stuff, I can retire and be a political consultant.
Yeah,
so
absolutely, no question in my mind.
Well, thank you.
And I don't, no matter what, I'm never going to consider myself a politician, even though I'm in politics, but we'll see.
Well, it used to be a noble term of art. It really isn't anymore. But if we have more good people like you that are in it for the right reasons, especially in this region, which has been beset with corruption, and it's really disgusting what's gone on in northeastern Pennsylvania between commissioners and mayors and judges and everybody else parading off to federal prisons. So good people need to get involved. It's a noble profession, as important as anything else. It's the one profession that you can most profoundly impact people's lives.
Yeah.
More than doctors, more than lawyers, and that's why I think public service and the right people in it is critical for the future of our democracy.
There's no question, and that's also, it's so important for people to get out and vote, and even at the borough level, the municipal level, those are some of the most important decisions you'll make because they're the ones that are dealing with your situations. The higher you get up the food chain, it's not so much. But, at the county level, the Senate level, And then, like I said, at the borough level, that they're very important decisions. You got to pick good people. That's the only way we're going to fix these problems.
All right.
Well, hey, I can tell you, and I'm not just saying it, and I proved it over the past year and a half, nobody's going to work harder than me.
No question. I've seen it.
You know?
Yeah.
I've dealt with, over this pandemic, congressmen, senators, representatives, to try to come up with solutions and try to have that collaboration.
Right.
Not one meeting was Marty Flynn at with me.
Wow.
Ever.
Wow. That's surprising.
That's remarkable to me.
Yep, that's surprising. I wouldn't have thought that.
Not one.
Wow.
So, but at any rate, it is what it is, and we'll see what happens. But I appreciate you taking your time out of your busy day and
Not that busy,
sitting
Chris.
with me.
You're a friend.
You're
and,
always busy.
You're a good man, as they said, and the people will be well served if they choose to send you to Pennsylvania Senate.
Well, thank you.
It was my pleasure.
Well, thank you. And nothing would make me happier as being a senator sitting here doing the same podcast, so which I will continue, by the way.
I'll be happy to come back and talk to you as a senator. Right?
All right. Well, great. Thank you. And look
Thank
forward
you,
to
Chris.
seeing you around. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Well, that was an awesome conversation with Chuck. I really appreciate him coming on, taking his time out of his day. Next week, we're going to take a little bit of a break because we have an election, and let's see how the chips fall when that happens. So if you like this episode or any of the other episodes, this is all paid for and brought to you by the Friends of Chris Chermak. So if you'd like to make a donation, much appreciated. Look us up, give us a call, whatever you want. Don't forget to share this, like, tell your friends. Let's get this out there. Also, this election coming up, it's a special election for me. I'm running for Senate in District 22 here in Lackawanna County, Luzerne, and Monroe. And this is not a primary. This is the election. So tell your friends and tell everyone out there that this is it. It's a one and done. Whoever wins the election is the senator. So if you're an independent, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. Everybody can vote. It'll be on all the ballots. So it's very important to get out and vote. But I thank you for coming on, and I look forward to seeing our next show. We'll have a surprise guest because I don't know who it is yet. We have a lot to pick from, but I'll surprise you on the next episode. So thanks, and we'll see you next time.